The 1970s had plenty of serious music, but it also had some of the most gloriously ridiculous songs ever recorded. Songs about streakers, dead skunks, CB radios, and kung fu. Songs that somehow made it to number 1. Songs that people who lived through the decade have never been able to shake. These are 10 funny songs from the 1970s you'll never forget. Number 10, Dead Skunk by Loudon Wainwright III.
Dead skunk in the middle of the road, dead skunk.
Loudon Wainwright III was being called the new Bob Dylan in the early 1970s. He was a thoughtful literary singer-songwriter with a sardonic wit and a serious following on the folk circuit. And then he wrote a song about a dead skunk in the middle of the road in 15 minutes, and that became the only chart hit of his entire career.
Dead skunk in the middle of the road, dead skunk.
The song was released in November of 1972, and at first it went nowhere. Then, sometime in early 1973, radio stations started picking it up, and suddenly, it was everywhere. It climbed to number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100, which remains the highest chart position Wainwright ever achieved. The song came out of a real incident. He actually ran over a skunk while driving, and the smell apparently inspired the whole composition before the day was out. He said he had already killed it by the time he hit it, which he seemed to feel was important clarification.
You got your dead skunk in the middle of the road, dead.
The folk music crowd was not always amused. Wainwright later described the song as his dreaded hit single, the kind of backhanded acknowledgement that comes from knowing a 3-chord joke about roadkill is the thing people remember you for across 5 decades of serious work. He kept playing it live regardless. The crowd always sang along. He told the London Times in 2008 that for him, it really was just about a dead skunk. He had no hidden agenda. Some people heard political allegory, he heard tire treads.
Dead skunk in the middle of the road, stinking to high.
The song led to something unexpected. The chart exposure brought Wainwright to the attention of television producers, and it landed him a recurring acting role as Captain Calvin Spaulding on the television series MASH during the 1974-75 season. A dead skunk got Loudon Wainwright III onto one of the most watched shows in America. There is no explaining the 1970s.
Dead skunk in the middle of the road, dead skunk.
Number 9, Spiders and Snakes by Jim Stafford.
I don't like spiders and snakes, and that ain't what it...
Jim Stafford was a genuinely gifted comedian and musician who had a brief but spectacular run of novelty hits in 1973 and 1974. His specialty was a kind of cheerful Southern storytelling that made even the most outlandish subject sound like something that happened to a friend of a friend last weekend. Spiders and Snakes, released in late 1973 and climbing the charts through early 1974, was the biggest of his hits, reaching number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100.
I don't like spiders and snakes.
Yeah?
And that ain't what it...
The song tells the story of a boy trying to impress a girl who is clearly not impressed by his approach, which involves introducing her to the local wildlife. It's a simple premise, executed with the kind of easy charm that made Stafford a natural on television. The song's success was notable enough that NBC gave him his own summer replacement variety show in 1975, The Jim Stafford Show, which ran for 1 season and featured a young Bobcat Goldthwait among its regular cast. His popularity during that period was genuine and substantial, even if the mainstream spotlight moved on quickly.
I don't like spiders and snakes, and that ain't what it...
The song was co-written by David Bellamy, who would later become one half of the Bellamy Brothers, the country duo best remembered for their 1979 hit, If I Said You Had a Beautiful Body, Would You Hold It Against Me? That song was also, in its own way, an exercise in the kind of gently ribald humor that defined a certain strand of 1970s pop. Stafford and Bellamy were working in the same tradition, and Spiders and Snakes is the track that gave Bellamy his first real commercial foothold. Stafford went on to own and perform at a long-running venue in Branson, Missouri, where he was a fixture for decades. The show ran for many years, and he built a loyal regional following that outlasted the novelty hit era by several generations. People who discovered him through Spiders and Snakes in 1974 were still coming to see him perform in the 2000s.
I don't like spiders and snakes, and that ain't what it...
Number 8, King Tut by Steve Martin and the Toot Uncommons.
King Tut.
In 1977 and 1978, the traveling exhibition of artifacts from the tomb of Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun toured 7 major American cities and drew approximately 8 million visitors. The cultural impact was extraordinary. Department stores sold Tut merchandise, fashion designers referenced Egyptian motifs, and school children across the country were suddenly fascinated by a boy king who had died around 1323 BC. It was one of the genuine popular culture phenomena of the late 1970s. Steve Martin watched all of this and wrote a song.
How'd you get so funky?
King Tut was performed for the first time on the April 22, 1978 episode of Saturday Night Live, where Martin was hosting. He came out with a full band and actually members of the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, credited on the record as the Toot Uncommons, dressed in Egyptian costumes and played the song with the kind of committed physical performance that had made him one of the most popular stand-up comedians in the country. The studio audience's reaction was immediate. The television audience's reaction was large enough to turn a live comedy performance into a commercial single. King Tut was released as a single in 1978 and sold over 1 million copies. It reached number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 11 on the year-end chart for 1978. The song also appeared on Martin's album, A Wild and Crazy Guy, which reached number 2 on the Billboard 200 and won him a Grammy Award for Best Comedy Recording. Radio station WLS in Chicago, near the Field Museum, where the Tut exhibition had been on display, put it at number 1 on its own local chart for 4 straight weeks and ranked it the 11th biggest hit of 1978.
Dancing by the Nile. Disco.
Martin was already a major star when King Tut happened. His stand-up specials had been huge, and his work on Saturday Night Live as a frequent guest host had made him a household name. The song was part of a broader moment when his humor was at its most commercially dominant, and the combination of timing, absurdity, and genuine musical craft gave it a quality that most novelty records never manage. He later scaled back the comedy music side of his work as he transitioned more fully into film, and King Tut remained one of the few records he made that anyone could hum on demand. The Nitty Gritty Dirt Band members who backed him on the recording, accredited as the Toot Uncommons, were accomplished musicians who gave the song a tighter musical foundation than most novelty records receive, which is part of why it holds up as well as it does. It was silly, it was absurd, it was exquisitely timed, and it caught a specific cultural moment. A nation collectively charmed by an ancient Egyptian teenager, with enough warmth and irreverence that it has never really dated. Number 7, My Ding-a-Ling by Chuck Berry. The most ironic chart moment in Chuck Berry's entire career came in 1972 with a song he did not write. Berry had been recording original rock and roll classics since the mid-1950s. Johnny B. Good, Roll Over Beethoven, rock and roll music, songs that defined a genre, none of them ever reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Not one. And then he released a live recording of a bawdy double entendre novelty song that had been written by someone else entirely, and it went straight to number 1. My Ding-a-Ling was originally written and recorded by Dave Bartholomew in 1952. Berry first played around with it in 1968, performing a version called My Tambourine. By 1972, when he performed it for the audience recorded at the Lanchester Arts Festival in Coventry, England, the song had evolved into the version everyone knows, a call and response sing-along built on a children's rhyme with a very adult subtext. The audience at Coventry did exactly what he wanted them to do. The recording made it onto his 1972 album, The London Chuck Berry Sessions, and the single version hit number 1 in the United Kingdom first, then crossed the Atlantic and climbed to the top of the American charts as well. Berry was visibly ambivalent about the whole situation. He was a songwriter of genuine stature who had shaped American music, And his biggest commercial hit turned out to be a cover of a 20-year-old novelty song. He kept it in his live shows for the rest of his career because it was simply what audiences expected. The crowd never wanted to let it go, and the call and response structure meant it could run as long as the room stayed with it. Barry could stretch a live performance of My Ding-a-Ling to almost any length, depending on how enthusiastic the audience was. Some nights it went on for a very long time.
Catch me playing with my ding-a-ling-a-ling, oh.
Number 6. Disco Duck by Rick Dees.
Look at me, I'm the disco duck.
Rick Dees was a Memphis radio disc jockey in 1976, not a recording artist. He had no particular musical ambitions beyond the ones that could be contained inside a broadcast shift. What he did have was an idea, a song about a man who attends a disco party, feels the urge overtake him, and begins dancing like a duck. The voice he used to portray the transformation, a warbling, falsetto duck impression laid over a driving disco beat, was specifically designed to be funny. He did not expect it to top the charts. Disco Duck was credited to Rick Dees and his cast of idiots and released in 1976. It reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there for a week in October of that year. It sold over 6 million copies. Dees' label, RSO Records, was also home to the Bee Gees and had a commanding presence in the disco marketplace, which helped the single get the kind of radio saturation that no amount of artistic merit could have guaranteed on its own. The song was everywhere for a period of months that many people remember with complicated feelings. The timing of the record's chart peak tells a small story about the mid-1970s music landscape. The song knocked A Fifth of Beethoven by Walter Murphy off the number 1 position, itself a novelty record that had turned Beethoven's Fifth Symphony into a disco track, and was in turn knocked off the top spot by If You Leave Me Now by Chicago. That 3-week window captures something about what was on the radio in the fall of 1976 that no cultural essay could quite replicate. Dees never had another charting single. He returned to radio, where he built a long and successful career as a broadcaster, eventually hosting a nationally syndicated show for decades. He held on to the bluesmobile, the joke, and the character, and understood that the duck had given him something most disc jockeys never get: a number 1 record and a story worth telling. Number 5. The Streak by Ray Stevens.
Oh, yes, they call him the streak.
Ray Stevens had already been making novelty records for over a decade when streaking became a national craze in early 1974. Streaking, the practice of running naked through public spaces, often at sporting events, graduations, and award ceremonies, spread through American college campuses and quickly captured the attention of the mainstream media. By March 1974, it had made the evening news multiple times. Stevens recognized the moment and moved fast. The Streak was released in the spring of 1974 and went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, where it stayed for 3 weeks. The song is structured as a series of news reports, each describing a new streaking incident, with a man-on-the-street interview segment where an increasingly agitated witness keeps spotting the same naked runner while desperately trying to shield his wife Ethel from the sight. The comedy is broad and relentless, and it captured exactly the national mood of bemused disbelief that most people felt watching grown adults run through graduation ceremonies with no clothes on.
Oh yes, they call him the streak. Oh yes, they call him the streak.
The song was released just days before one of the most famous real-life streaking incidents of the entire era, the 46th Academy Awards ceremony in April 1974, during which a man named Robert Opel dashed across the stage behind host David Niven while millions watched on television. Niven's response to the incident became one of the most quoted ad-libs in Oscar history. The timing between the song's release and that televised moment was not planned, but was spectacularly convenient, and it helped push the record to the top and keep it there. Stevens had a long career as both a novelty artist and a more straightforward country and pop performer. His recording history stretched across multiple decades and multiple genres. But The Streak is the song that most people reach for first because it captured a very specific and very brief cultural moment with absolute precision. The streaking fad was largely over by the summer of 1974. The song outlasted the fad by 50 years.
Oh, yes, they call him the streak.
Number 4. Kung Fu Fighting by Carl Douglas.
Everybody was kung fu fighting.
Carl Douglas was a Jamaican-born singer based in Britain who had been working in the music industry for years without significant commercial success, when he found himself with 10 minutes of studio time left at the end of a session in 1974. The session had been booked to record I Want to Give You My Everything, a straightforward soul single produced by British Indian musician Biddu. That was the intended A-side. The B-side was an afterthought. Douglas had written some lyrics based on the martial arts craze that was sweeping through popular culture. Kung fu films from Hong Kong were dominating cinema screens. The television series Kung Fu, starring David Carradine, had been a hit in America, and Bruce Lee had become a global icon. With the last 10 minutes of paid studio time remaining, Biddu worked out a melody and Douglas recorded a quick track. It was never meant to be heard by many people.
In fact, it was a little bit frightening.
Pi Records looked at what they had and decided Kung Fu Fighting had more potential than I Want to Give You My Everything. They released it as the A-side. The BBC initially rejected it, concerned the song glorified violence. Then it appeared in dance clubs, and the reaction was immediate. It entered the UK chart at number 42 in August 1974, reached number 1 in 3 weeks, and stayed there. In the United States, it hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 on December 7, 1974. The single eventually sold 11 million copies worldwide, making it one of the best-selling singles of all time. Douglas recorded a follow-up the following year called Dance the Kung Fu, which failed to break the top 40. He never had another hit of any comparable magnitude. The song that was recorded in 10 minutes as a throwaway B-side became his entire commercial legacy, one of the most recognizable recordings of the entire decade. Biddu, the producer who decided to flip it to the A-side, went on to have a productive career producing other artists, most notably Tina Charles, whose I Love to Love was a major UK hit in 1976. His instinct about the 10-minute throwaway proved to be one of the better commercial judgments in 1970s pop music.
Everybody was kung fu fighting.
Number 3. Shaving Cream by Benny Bell.
I stepped in a big pile of shaving.
The story behind Shaving Cream is one of the stranger ones in 1970s pop history. The song had actually been written and originally recorded decades earlier. Benny Bell, a comedian who performed on the Borscht Belt circuit and had been making risque recordings since the 1940s, wrote the original version, which was a song about a man who keeps substituting the word shaving cream for something more profane every time he's about to say it. The joke is built entirely around what the word isn't. The version that hit the charts in 1975 was not Bell's original recording. The label re-released the concept using a different singer, Phil Winston, who performed it under the stage name Paul Wynn. The charting version was credited to Benny Bell, but it was Winston's voice on the record. Despite that, it reached number 30 on the Billboard Hot 100, which was an extraordinary achievement for a comedy song that most of the record industry considered completely uncommercial. What pushed it was Dr. Demento, the Los Angeles radio personality who specialized in bizarre, humorous, and novelty recordings, had started featuring Shaving Cream regularly on his program, and his audience was passionate enough to create real commercial momentum for a record that mainstream radio might never have touched. The song became one of the defining examples of how the Dr. Demento show worked, a track that existed in a cultural space entirely outside the normal music industry pipeline, brought to a mass audience by one obsessive radio programmer who believed in it. Bell was in his 80s when the song charted. He died in 1999.
I stepped in a big pile of shaving.
Number 2. Convoy by C.W. McCall. C.W. McCall was not a real person. He was a character invented by an advertising executive named Bill Fries, who worked at an Omaha agency in the early 1970s and created the trucker persona to sell bread for a local bakery called Metz Baking Company. The character, a drawling, folksy truck driver named C.W. McCall, appeared in radio commercials for the Old Home Bread brand, became popular with listeners, and won Fries a National Clio Award for advertising excellence. At some point, Fries and his collaborator Chip Davis, who would later found Mannheim Steamroller, decided to make actual records under the McCall name. The early singles sold well regionally. MGM Records picked up the act for national distribution. And then in 1975, Fries wrote Convoy, a spoken word song delivered over a country backing track, built entirely from CB radio slang and trucker culture, following a fictional convoy of trucks rolling from the West Coast to the East Coast through escalating confrontations with law enforcement. It was released in late 1975 and reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in January 1976, where it stayed for 1 week. It also hit #1 on the country charts, where it stayed for 6 weeks.
Yeah, we got a great big convoy. Ain't she a beautiful sight?
CB radios had become a genuine cultural phenomenon in the mid-1970s. The combination of the 1973 oil crisis, the resulting 55 miles per hour speed limit, and a general anti-authority feeling in post-Watergate America had made truckers into folk heroes. Citizens Band Radio was how truckers communicated, and by 1975, millions of ordinary Americans had bought CB sets to join in. The language, 10-4s, Smokies, rubber ducks, front doors, was everywhere. Convoy captured that moment exactly, and the song became a kind of anthem for a fad that probably peaked within a year of the record's release. The song was substantial enough to inspire a 1978 feature film directed by Sam Peckinpah, one of the most celebrated American directors of the era, whose career included The Wild Bunch and Straw Dogs. Peckinpah directed Convoy, starring Chris Christopherson as Rubber Duck, Ali McGraw as his companion, and Ernest Borgnine as the relentless pursuing sheriff. The film was Peckinpah's most commercially successful project, earning more at the box office than any of his previous films, though critics were divided on it. Fries, operating as C.W. McCall, recorded a new version of the song with updated lyrics that referenced the film's plot and characters for use during the closing credits. The character he had invented to sell bread ended up on a cinema screen directed by one of Hollywood's most serious filmmakers. The 1970s produced stranger stories than this, but not many. #1, Mr. Jaws by Dickie Goodman.
Mr. Jaws, before you swim out to sea, have you...
Dickie Goodman had a very specific formula for making records, and he used it for most of his career. He would play a character, usually a reporter, asking questions into a microphone, and the answers would be snippets of current pop and rock hits, cut together in a way that made them seem to be responding to what was asked. It was called a break-in record, and Goodman had been making them since the late 1950s. In the summer of 1975, he aimed his format squarely at the biggest cultural phenomenon in America at that moment, the film Jaws. Mr. Jaws became his biggest hit. It reached #4 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1975, which was remarkable for a record built entirely on other people's music. Goodman's reporter character asks increasingly absurd questions about the shark and the townspeople, and the answers come back as snippets of recognizable records from that period. The timing was perfect. Jaws had been released in June 1975 and was breaking every box office record that existed. Everyone in America had seen it or was talking about it, and a record that turned it into a comedy sketch found an immediate and willing audience. There was something about the 1970s that gave funny songs room to breathe. Maybe it was the AM radio format, where a novelty record could get the same 2 or 3 minutes as anything else on the dial. Maybe it was the sheer cultural chaos of the decade, where streaking and CB radios and King Tut exhibitions all felt like they deserved their own soundtrack. Whatever it was, the songs these artists made stuck. Not just because they were funny, but because they were genuinely good at being exactly what they were. If this brought back some memories, leave a like and let us know which one was your favorite in the comments. And if you want more videos like this one, subscribe and stick around.